Or we're live.
Excellent. Hello, world. It's Nijez Temple here again, our salon of enlightenment, as we discuss all kinds of things that are interesting and innovative for the human condition. A topic that we'll be doing today is talking about kind of branding in sort of mythological terms or characters or creatures that can act as like a branding device for the various mojos. And just as in mojo rating, you have to separate between the males and the females. There's also branding issues with that as well. And so we talk particularly about the Nijai. So a small group tonight, but we have two Nijai males here tonight, which I want to get a lot of kind of interaction with on this topic. That'll be doing the first portion, the Nijez portion, and the second half, we're talking about in Romantics Temple, basically the 10 major gradients that are around a cult, and basically how those work, how people can move in and out of them, and the necessity for each of the layers. All right, so introductions, we'll get started. I am Niji Coach.
I am Nigel.
I'm Nijai Infiniti.
I am Nijai Bruno.
All right, so first we'll start with the Nijez portion here, and there was a topic that Bruno brought up about how the Nijai males, when we're going out and meet and talk with them, may not be as appreciative of the descriptors that we've used, for example, in general, such as, say, a fairy or things of that nature, because those words don't have the same kind of connotations for males versus females, which is unfortunate, and that's something we'll be discussing. So basically, when I came up with the fairies, I was basing it off of the kind of the general mythology from old Europe, and then also how that has kind of moved into popular role playing and other kind of games in pop culture. And so I chose the fairy for a few reasons, and I understand that that term itself may be something that will be causing a flinch response in Nijai males, and I want to get around that, but at the same time being as truthful as I can. So first off, we don't have to use any term. So that's one thing to kind of just remove pressure, is that there does not have to be a mythological counterpoint for the any mojo. For example, it may be when we get into other mojos finding mythological branding, logos. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense. Maybe grizzly bears make more sense as a branding device for certain mojos. That makes sense. And then for males and females, same as well. So that's the first one, is we can get a cool mythological creature, great, but we're not going to make that a have to get. What we have to get is positive shorthands. That's basically what branding is about. The ability to actually show an image or say a word, and when you do that, it transmits a whole bunch with it. And so in the case of the fairies, the reason why that was such a good pick in general, besides its latentness, if you separate the latentness, is that fairies in mythology have a reputation for being playful, being upbeat, not being of this world, being in two places at once, teleportation of themselves, other creatures, heroes they bump into, juggling, the ability to juggle ideas, and also like they can do chores by making everything light and spin around in the air. There's quite a few things that relate a lot to Nijai powers. They're light, that they tend to radiate like an aura of light, which is very, very draws people towards them, makes you actually want to grab them and hold them, keep them forever, which is something that, for example, both in the alpha, all the gatherers in their way have to watch out for, is that they're particularly kind of shiny. It's a very upbeat kind of shiny. People want to grab onto it. In the case of the Alpha, it has like a magical quality. So those elements. Gathering. Fairies are generally found in mythologies. They're gathering stuff, and they don't like to be bothered when they're gathering, hence the irrepressibility and their intense level of freedom. Separating them, for example, from, say, elves. Elves, the way they're more often portrayed is sort of like a superior, elevated form of human that doesn't necessarily have to have such association with being adaptive or being a gatherer, where the fairy in mythology does have a much stronger kind of mercurial, mischievous, does what it wants to do, dances on light, doesn't like to be held down kind of quality, which is more specific to gatherers, particularly Ni Alpha gatherers. So that's what I'd like to capture. If we can't capture it with mythology, we find other branding devices. But what we're looking for is something that when you say it, it transmits all that. Do you know what I mean? Say dragon or so forth. There's a lot of things that may not be exact, but when you're talking about a conceptual hunter, using that metaphor is a good shorthand to get someone like in the general ballpark quickly, and then you kind of go in from there. That's the advantage of branding and symbols and things of that nature. So with that said, I'll just kind of hand over. I'm curious what you guys' thoughts are. Oh, I did have one other thing that came up when we were kind of discussing a bit before, is that one thing must be paid attention to is that humans have not been doing the peak pathways correctly, so almost all the peak pathways have a bias against them as far as storytelling that must be ignored or reinvented in some way. Because, for example, one thing I noticed is that there can be a tendency, particularly for male Nijai, but really Ni in general, when it tries to say how cool and awesome and badass it is, to slip in using Ni with Z. It's very common. And that's because Z closes, Z puts scores on the board. It's more yang, and you're trying to get like props. But actually what should be props is how light, magical, juggling, teleporting, freedom-loving the power is. So that's something to be watched out for, is that in an attempt to get like, this power is awesome, not to try and put it in terms of another power. Do you mean trying to find why Ni is awesome? First of all, anything that's going to bring in a lot of like closure, winning, or battle, those all actually aren't really Ni. And so the main metaphors we come up with have to be separate from that. Although obviously when you come into like say Righteous Intervener, then the Righteous Intervener form would have those elements. But the primary, like say the Spirit Force creature based on the primary power, it's a gathering power. Now that's when we talk about this is kind of like I'm trying to nine it right now, kind of set the scene before we get going, because once you get started, it's so easy to have the world lean on you, so easy. So you really have to set yourself going in first of all of what you're trying to accomplish. So gathering is awesome, it is powerful, but it may not be seen in the typical manly way that the world is expecting to be told out of the gate, but you can use it for purposes like that. But like, for example, if you take some of those Nijai music artists that you like, Bruno, that are more of the hard variety, it's easy sometimes to see the Z that they're doing. But really, the Ni genius, the cleverness to be able to come up with the ideas, that's what makes them, you know what I mean, the artistic, badasses that they are. But it can be often, even, Nijai themselves, particularly the males, will often show their cleverness in Z. You can do it like, I'm sure, Infinity, like in academic things, like you kind of show off your Ni, but with Z fronting for you. And that's okay, because it needs to happen sometimes, but it's very
we want pure Ni.
It's very important you know what's going on always that's happening, and that brings back to branding. If you're branding like the Nijai at its primary, actually a Z front person needs to kind of step off for a second. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not really time for that. So we kind of have to find the glory and the awesomeness in that gathering quality.
Right.
That'll be one element, as opposed to trying to fit it to something else. But that's it. Go ahead.
So I have two terms. They're not necessarily mythological, but they touch on something. One is the word seeker, seeking something. They're on a quest. Although quest might get into the Ni part to some degree.
No, that's the issue. Is that
okay?
Ni does seek, but if you say like you focus, I mean, I would hopefully want to talk to everyone I meet in the street. If I bother to go approach them, it's because I thought they might have some secret action going on.
Right.
So I will use the seeker word on just about anyone I approach as like a bondage.
That's right. It might be too general. Right.
Yeah. But as far as like specifically, but getting into like but then when you get to like the quest aspect, that's starting to get a bit directive and specific.
Yep. I see why. The second term is hobbit. I mean, it turns out that most of the hobbits, from what Mojo read, I think they're on the Nijai side. Maybe there are exceptions there.
That's true as far as the actors. The one thing I worry about on that,
Okay.
in the kind of pantheon of like things out in the woods and so forth, you got your goblins and your demons and so forth, and your undead. Those are all over here, okay? But you have then this sort of spectrum of like pseudo-humans, of which the most light is the fairy, generally. Under that is the elf. And then there are like degrees you go into where you would actually say like the hobbit. The hobbit is more sensitive than your general human, but very earthy. Hobbits are generally considered like halflings. Halflings are moving towards dwarf.
Okay, so you're getting a little bit into the Vez channel. Is that what you're basically saying?
A bit. We start getting into the hobbit. It's moving towards gnome, moving towards dwarf. And so the love of food, the love of good wine, the love of good tobacco, that's kind of...
Getting away.
Yeah. Away from the light. The
Right.
glow.
Okay. I think we have to treat this like a brainstorming session. Kind of,
Right.
we're not going to hit the goal. I think we just have to keep on.
That's why what I want to do is kind of set the scene of two main things. Is what the fairy thing had as far as why it was a good shorthand. So we can try to get other places, the light, the teleporting, the luck, the freedom-loving, that kind of stuff. Immunity to age, that's another one. Often fairies will take the hero, and if they don't like the hero, they'll age them, Rip Van Winkle style. If they like you, they'll take age away, make you younger. So there's quite a few ever youth quality. We talk about knee dancing eyes, even like old Nealp with crinkly faces. Those dancing eyes just give this ever youth quality. So those are elements we want to capture somehow. And then the other major component is not to be steered by what the world expects in branding, particularly for males.
Right.
Yeah, that was that was the concern that I had, about the branding. And so, for me, I think the thing that would speak the loudest, when I first found Podlayer and even now, is just the samples. Like having like a swath of samples that you can pick from, and then getting good at like sort of targeting the person. Like, okay, maybe they have like a funny haircut, so they may be more creative, or they may be wearing like very nice, like very stylish stuff, so they may be more professional or whatever.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And sort of going for that versus because mythologically, like this is exactly what we're doing. We're trying to undo all the toxic memes that exist throughout history, and it's so basic that the Nijai essence is closely tied with whatever culture you go into. The fairy type character is going to be the closest thing that you can get to a Nijai.
That might cause a flinch reaction, at least beginning with the Nijai male.
There's just I mean, most Nijai male, they'll I mean they'll have, if they're older than like, I mean if they're old enough for us to be talking to, they're gonna have had that beaten out of them.
Sure.
By that point.
For sure. Yeah. So going off what you said there, Bruno, it's a good idea. We still have to capture the same elements, and what you're talking about is basically a bit different payload delivery methods. That's an exciting idea. Basically, kind of like on the mat here, what we need to do in those moments is a shorthand. So going up, I'm just kind of brainstorming here a bit what you're saying, Bruno, is so let's say we want to go with like the light aspect, those kind of elements that are really cool that a fairy might have in that way, but we don't say that, is come up with a log line that kind of says what a Nijai male comedian has, like a one-sentence thing of like, there's a lot of Nijai males in comedy. They're cool like this, cool like this, cool like this, and kind of like make it real world, talk about Nijai males, but I still want to convey how they can make people be in a great mood. They can connect stuff. They can make really insightful connections and things like that. And in a way that won't cause any tripwires to go off. It'll just be like saying, but we still need, if that makes sense, kind of like in like Dungeons & Dragons, whatever. You need like a character class. So kind of like saying like Nijai male comedian. You know what I mean? And like, because that makes it easy. a shorthand to kind of like, yeah, I get you, because you want to get that as soon as you can. So
Well,
without,
I think that may come. I mean, naturally you're looking at this as an IG, and so an IG is going to want a high density, just like you're describing,
Right.
like a high density of information crushed into one sentence, and that's very that's very appealing to an IG. But to an EJI, actually, what's more appealing is throwing out a bunch of names. I would think.
I agree.
For me personally, just throwing out a bunch of names and seeing what the person constellates out of that. So it's sort of up to the EJI to grab a bunch of things at once. Because for an EJI, throwing them one very heavy item is sort of like, whoa, what do I do with this,
right, but see, my plan was not to set it as a heavy item. Actually, often I'll just put it in smooth. What it does, though, is you are correct. My NI does want something. I don't want a singular crushing thing. Often, what I want is a premise platform. And so, if I say there's a lot of Nijai male comedians in comedy, and they do this cool, and this cool. In one sentence, I basically said, you're cool, in these kind of ways, and it opens up, because now I think I could just start throwing, like you were saying, like this Nijai, and this Nijai, and this Nijai, and like then just go like sort of brainstorming with it, kind of see, but I kind of like set two things. One, this is complimentary. I want to kind of establish that in my first sentence that, like, what I'm about to tell you as I throw stuff at you, like you're saying all this like cool Nijai male names, but I'm already set the scene like this is meant as a compliment. And then also a theme. Not a singular crushing. You are right, as an IJ, I do want that in general, but as far as like when I'm doing like the faux casual, when I do faux casual, I like to actually say something in one or two sentences that can even kind of just act like it wasn't that big of a deal, but it allows me to then say a bunch of other things.
But I think again, it's coming from that bounty versus meaning dichotomy, where it feels like what you're suggesting feels like meaning first, bounty later. You're like, I want to give you the meaning of what I'm saying, that it's a compliment, and then I'll give you the bounty of the samples. But for an EJI, it just feels more natural to throw up a bounty first, let them sort of suss out any meaning in reading between the lines, without having to say that it's a compliment. There's certain EJI males that you can say, that you can just bring up in conversation, like the ones that you purify recently, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese. If they're into music, like Thom Yorke, DJ Shadow, Notorious B.I.G. These are all guys that like no male basically could find any faults with. Much, even more so if it's an EJI.
But I think what we're doing here is, which I appreciate, but it's just so long as you see what we're doing here. We're actually talking about the methodology of approaching people, which is a separate issue. So when I approach a person, I would adjust my tactics based on who I'm dealing with, for example. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I was talking to an IG, I might push more on the meaning. If I was talking to an EJI, I might dazzle a bit more with a buffet. With that said, we were, I believe, noting that if you decided to go with a meaning, a thematic, a branding, that there was a lack of good option on the EJI side. So today, does it make sense? Like, because what you're talking about, that's actually an issue of like, how would you approach the person, and would you actually approach an EJI the same manner as an IG? Which no, I don't. I approach every individual as what they are. I kind of read them as I'm watching them. But what I'm talking about now is actually like the toolkit. Within the toolkit, I agree. You'd want to have a buffet option. You'd also want to have like a BAM branding, like a 1 or 2 sentence log line. Hence why log lines are a big deal out there. You want to have a buffet of items, but you also have the log line.
Yeah, I like the idea of both.
Right. So you need both, and I agree totally, Bruno. You need both, and depending on who it is, a lot of niche you would focus more on the buffet. But at some point, you might feel the need to use that tactic.
Here's the thing, then. I would avoid. I see where you're going. I would avoid then the comedy first, and I would go with directors, because Nijai, that highlights one important aspect of the Nijai, which is it's not a traditional leading male. It's not your traditional alpha leading dog. But many Nijai will feel a kinship with those types of characters because they have more of that directorial or like oversight kind of big picture. They if they have a good connection to their other, they'll have a big picture type of understanding that naturally carries over into story form. And the whole comedy thing, like so many Nijai, like Mike Myers, Chris Farley, so many of the top Nijai comedians they basically make themselves the butt of the joke, whereas really sharp and Robin Williams, like some of the top Nijai ones, do this as well, but there's less of that room for like ego and growth, which is that's the thing that like really gets beaten down by society out of a Nijai, is that whole thing that you should as a Nijai you should have a voice, you should have your authentic Jai, channeled through your knee and all these things, and that's really discouraged. So the whole thing with comedy is like a thing that Nijai males often do as a way to like diffuse situation and as a way to deal with the fact that like they feel inadequate in many ways, I think. And
I see what you're saying, and I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. I just think there are a few overlapping layers that also add that context, which I'll just throw in there because I don't think I disagree with anything you just said there. But just to add to it is that when you were talking, you naturally went with, say, the directors, and you kind of were mentioning their administering role, which is sort of like a more classic leadership role. And I definitely plan on using that. And again, this gets into like the tactics. We're still, I believe, in the same situation, which is if I was talking to a lot of Nijai males, and I can see this from talking to yourself and just knowing how people are in general, obviously I'm going to have to be sensitive to their sensitivities in this way. Does that make sense?
For sure.
Okay. But when you were saying like the Jai and then also like kind of like the ego and the being leader and so forth, those are actually kind of getting a bit away from the pure Ni. And so I understand that there's issues, but I'm still left with a dilemma right now, which is it's a fun dilemma to kind of try to figure it out. But a suitable Ni-focused avatar of being a Nijai male. For example, the reason why I mentioned comedy is because, as I've mentioned many times before, if you had to say one attribute that seems to kind of link it together, except for a few anomalies, is Nez. Comedy and Nez are like fused like this. So if I do, for example, the directors, in order to capture that, I'm going to have to really focus on the creativity part and imagining new worlds and things of that, and staying away from all, this is key. I want to make sure I separate this. Not staying away from talking about the ego and the leadership and those kinds of things that the Nijai male directors have, because that's great. It's a great sell. And so I probably am going to avoid going pure Ni with Nijai males as looking like, because it can be too awkward. However, at some point though, for example, like say like Nijai females, like Starglow, when I was talking with her, initially going as such, there was a lot more like the buffet, and we jumped around and so forth. But as a part of that, there was also a need at some point to kind of say, like this, in relating to Nijai at their pure Ni. And even Starglow, who's actually a female Nijai, there can sometimes be a reluctance to kind of own what Ni is like in its pureness. It's a very open power, and it feels almost like too vulnerable to describe it that way. So what I'm saying right now is that I definitely going to be very sensitive about broaching this subject. However, I still feel I need to have an accurate way to describe being Ni.
I think that's a great idea, Coach. I think it's still absolutely necessary.
Yeah,
I think there's a way to polish it.
Polish it also probably with Nijai Mail, it's looking like I don't want to bring it up first. I probably will go through some other conversational,
Yeah, of course.
spots before addressing the fact that you're a Ni Alpha. Let's talk about what that means, because as you may have noticed, it seems like when talking about the neatness of it, that's when throws like the comedy. Being the butt of the joke, I think sometimes that's definitely the case. A lot of the AdRom males play supporting roles, and that unfortunately is a part of what goes along with it. And so I definitely see what you're seeing there. But then, like, take Russell Brand, who I don't think actually makes himself the butt of the joke that much. He's actually, I think a lot of people feel very nervous being in the room with him. And so he reminds me a lot of like a true life fairy or like mercurial creature whose mind and creativity is just too fast. I've yet to see him really be in a room with anyone interviewed where they can really keep up with him. And so that, I think, has to be a part of it, like just the breathtaking creativity and speed and inability to kind of pin them anywhere.
Maybe we should think of what the qualities of a Russell Brand, like, and.
Well, he's an example of one, but like somebody like so.
Maybe
that's actually a good point, Anthony, because the issue is like I would say comedian, but when we go there, what Bruno was saying is true. Is there's also this other swath of Nijai doing overly self-deprecating humor that gets mixed in with that description. So.
We get away from that and find the person.
I don't think we can have this discussion without doing both. We're basically talking about how to address the Nijai male in total. Actually, three things. How to address the Nijai male in total, be more holistic. Which do you start with? And so it's looking like, obviously, I'll probably want to talk a bit more about Nijai male, healthy ones, but Nijai males that show off a bit more through Z. Like some of those more hard rock and Nijai males, the more film director Nijai males, and things of that nature. Perhaps the social entrepreneurs. That would be better to lead with. Okay, but if I am being holistic, somewhere in the holistic, there's like talking about the Nijai male in spirit force creature.
I agree.
Full-on spirit force creature, dancing, having a great idea.
And this is where animation, I think, really. Came in really strong for me. Like so many of the anime, the Japanese anime people, but also like guys like Ralph Bakshi, Charles Fleischer, who's the voice of Roger Rabbit. I mean, Roger Rabbit. See, cartoons are much better because if they're the butt of the joke, it's not like humiliating to them.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, it's like their actual face isn't there, so it's kind of
Well, to me, very important. I don't want you to think for any second. I think that being the butt of the joke is actually a prerequisite to being a spirit.
That definitely would.
No, I'm just saying. Of course, I recognize you're saying, Bruno, that there is a lot of that in the demographics of the media people are used to seeing some Nijai males in, but when you actually watch them, I think being like just themselves. It's more just pure creativity, like playing roles where they'll be the butt of the joke and the person beating them. You say, for example, like Key and Peele, they're Nizai, but they're a classic example. They basically take turns where one is like the straight person and the other one kind of makes fun of them. And sometimes they'll both be weird, they'll both be straight. They'll kind of just do it like that. But to me, the Xiaolin
point actually
it's just breathtaking how they can shift those roles like that. How quick all the different skits they do, I find it quite dazzling. As a Nai person, it's really neat how they're able to do it. I find that if we could find a way to capture that for the Nijai, I think
that's what I'm trying to get at with animation. Animation is like a safe way to project that, so that it's not you're not identifying personally with it. Like for example, like Bugs Bunny or any Mel Blanc, who's also a Nijai. Yeah.
Speaking of Bugs Bunny.
Almost any in cartoons, like violence and these kinds of things, like being the butt of the joke, it's almost like a point of pride for a cartoon, because that's the point of being a cartoon. It's like you're stretchy like a rubber band, and you can bounce around the walls.
I still want to reiterate, because I'll make sure I was clear on this, that I don't think being the butt of the joke is a intrinsic part of it. I mentioned Key and Peele because I thought that although there is that element to it, it really, I find them, honestly, this coming Naiji here, I find them dangerous.
But that's
like the speed at which they're doing stuff is actually what I'm mainly.
But that's my point exactly. That's because you're an IG.
Right.
As a Ni Alpha, we don't find them dangerous. We identify with them, and maybe a little too much. It's like it hits a little too close to home, that feeling of like, of being like of changing character too fast, of like sometimes being the stray character, sometimes being the butt of the joke. As a Ni Alpha, it's not going to hit you that way. It's going to hit you as like impressive and otherworldly. But
Right.
for us, it's going to be like, that guy's funny, but if you tell me that I'm like that, then it's a little bit offensive. It's like,
I think maybe there's like a fear of like wanting to be the clown or something.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, because in animation is like a safe, at least for me, it feels like a safe way to relate to those kinds of characters, where those characters are the protagonist and the butt of the joke at the same time. Often in movies, the Adroms will be the supporting characters.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, I think I'm not accepting that they are the butt of the joke. I think that is what has been done by culture, but I don't think that's actually the role in general for them to be playing. For example, using Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny is, I would think, a classic kind of Ni hero. Just irreverent, does changing things up. Okay, but he's not the butt of the joke. I believe, almost always Elmer Fudd.
Yeah, he's the one
That's
who's
right.
getting his
Everyone
ass
else.
kicked. I mean, it's like
He makes everyone the butt of the jokes.
He makes us the butt of the joke. So actually,
Right. That's my point exactly. And he may, basically in cartoons, Ni Alpha can be the protagonist. And it's the story. That's like, if you want to tell someone this is the story about you, like a Ni Alpha protagonist in a cartoon is often much, much, much better off than a Ni Alpha in like a regular comedy, where they're usually the supporting role and not even the
I
protagonist.
see a point there.
It doesn't have to be that way, I think, though.
no.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
No, so it seems to me like I'll probably just avoid a lot of these things, a lot of hot button items when talking to the Nijai males. I would probably stick, I was starting out talking about more the social entrepreneur and the music artists and the film directors and things of that nature.
Bruno, I'm really.
Well, I don't know if I like the idea of being too limiting, though, Coach. 'cause-
No, I'm not going to limit myself, but I still feel that as a teacher, and this is separate from being Naiji or whatever, I'm just thinking as a teacher, whatever Mojo would be, I need the ability to actually show what I'm talking about. So although there are a lot of bad examples of Nijai male comedians perhaps being overly deferential or so forth, I'm trying to think of where else I could show the dazzling speed.
But you don't think animation is an appropriate topic because it's too abstract or something? Well,
No.
what I'm trying to say is that whereas I find comedy, especially comedy movies, where Adrons are most often cast as supporting characters, in animation the Ni Alpha are often the protagonists, and their magical powers are enhanced by the cartoonish, the cartoon landscape.
I see.
Like when I first found Podlayer, one of the main reasons I really identified with is that I completely misread Joe Pesci was Naiji, and I identified very heavily with that type of character, and then I translated that into Bugs Bunny and Roger Rabbit, and Mel Blanc. I assumed all of those were Naiji as well.
Oh wow.
And I think Mel Blanc might have been listed as Naiji at the time.
May have been.
So then I saw, Joe Pesci, Mel Blanc, I naturally, from those I naturally connected Bugs Bunny and Roger Rabbit, and a bunch of other cartoons, that are in my mind, and it just basically flooded my head. Like all these cartoon characters just flooded my head, and I was like, yeah, okay, if that's what being IG is, then that's what I am.
And meanwhile, they all turned.
Yeah,
That's
they all
so
turned.
funny.
Typical Ni Alpha fashion, they just turned like that, and it's just like, okay, there they are now. But yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to say that there's something wrong with comedy. I'm just saying the current modern perception of comedy skews heavily towards Adrams in a supporting role. But in animation, all of that goes away because the whole Ni-Alpha thing really flourishes in that environment, in that magical pseudo-reality. Sorry, go ahead.
That kind of like sounds to me like the cartoon world fantasy landscape is sort of like this. It's sort of like the Spirit Forest area. So there's like a lot of Japanese manga artists that are like have stories, and I thought they were Naiji, but they're actually Nijai that created these worlds. Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin, that's kind of like his fantasy world, but that's a little bit more realistic. It has to do with the real people. So I think that's also possible too. But animation is definitely is one way to go about it too.
Yeah, it's like a next door neighbor to the mythological world.
Yeah, and George R. R. Martin.
I think animation in general has a lot of Niji's characters in it. Like if you go to Japanese anime, like we don't really have too many manga artists. Like we have that dude who created Naruto and possibly like one or two others, but we probably need to investigate that area more. I noticed that there are a lot of Nijai male and female characters in anime, but also a lot of Naiji as well. It's fairly, from what I've seen, fairly balanced to some extent. But
and here's another thing is like in cartoons, like the whole think of Mike Myers like in Wayne's World, and here we're connecting with the whole thing with the other. Like that's sort of like he's sort of like the exception for being like pretty smooth. Like he's actually pretty smooth, and he gets the girl at the end and all that stuff. That's actually kind of the exception. Like if you think of Chris Farley or almost any other Ni-Alpha character, even Mike Myers in other movies that he plays, like well he often sets himself up in that fashion, but whereas in cartoons. Bugs Bunny, Roger Rabbit, like they all have the prettiest girlfriends.
Yeah, they're the heroes. They go all the way.
They're the heroes, basically.
Yeah, that's the. I see what you're saying.
And it's much easier to identify with that for a Ni-Alpha male than it is for as a supporting character in a comedy, where they often don't. Or like think of Dana Carvey.
There's like to me, I think there's like a shifting. Like good bad, I think it's not quite that binary.
It probably isn't. It probably is more gray.
The idea that two things. One, that the comedy in general is just going to be a bad thing to bring up because of the fact that there are a lot of maybe over use of the supporting character and self-deprecating. But there's a lot of other ones where Nijai are considered some of the more legendary comedians. To me, it seems like I'm wondering if I can't somehow zai that out to be its own thing, kind of avoid talking about that stuff, but it seems to me to leave on the table, so to speak, like, I don't know, like Jack Benny or things like that are like big names like that. It seems like that's a lot of coin, a lot of like well-known, respected coin that is in comedy, and could it be separated from the ill vibe that you're talking about? You know what I mean?
I don't know Jack Benny, actually.
Okay, but it can be any of the Nijai. For example, the Nijai guy who plays the lead in Red Dwarf, for example. There's a lot of Nijai comedians that are like well-loved characters, and they are considered like really cool, but they are comedians. I imagine maybe
Billy Crystal?
What's that? Billy Crystal's another one. You know what I mean? So there are ones that are really well liked, and they're.
He's liked, but it's not exactly like, oh, I want to be like Billy Crystal. He's not like the hero that you want to be like, like Bugs Bunny, Roger Rabbit. Those guys are like when I remember seeing those guys when I was much younger and being like that. Not only is that hilarious, but I totally identify with that character. Whereas for an IG, it may be like that guy's really funny. That little rabbit is like bouncing all over the place, and it's kind of ridiculous. Ha ha ha. But for Nijai, it's like, yes, that is how I feel. And I think it's about connecting those aha moments that like people identify with the character like that, and sort of presenting it to them in a way that's going to draw them in. Because for an IG male, there's just so many. Like, just turn on the TV, you're going to see.
Yeah, it's obvious.
I am definitely weighing it and putting it in my simulator to try to like make better choices. But I think there's two things going on again, which is what would I start with, and then where am I going to go? Because I can talk about Roger Rabbit. I mean, I liked Roger Rabbit. I like Bugs Bunny. So I mean, talking about those
those are just the like one end of the spectrum, like the really wild, delirious end. There's the more magical, fantastical end, the Haruki, the Hayao Miyazaki, the Studio Ghibli ones.
I understand that, and I'm also a fan of a lot of anime. So again, I will not find talking about those subjects to be unpleasant or challenging. I will enjoy that. But then see, to me, the topic of the fairy is right now being mixed a bit about talking about Tunisia males in the beginning. And I'm talking something else because I'm talking about how do you broach certain subjects at some point. For example, the fact that Nijai males are so represented in comedy that, do you mean like that one?
I actually didn't recognize any of the ones you named, like Red Dwarf guy. I looked it up because you mentioned it, but I didn't know that guy. And Jack Benny, I don't know who that is. So let's throw out some names in comedy.
I mean, I'm thinking
Red Dwarf is a show.
Right.
And again, I think we're a bit missing what I'm saying, and I want to kind of make sure we're zoning in here, which is there's a task that must be achieved when educating someone about the truth. There are certain topics in the buffet of truth, their truth, that must be addressed. So, regardless of whether or not you know the Nijai males, I'm just going to state it for a fact, and I can come with samples later for you. They are very represented in that. That's just a fact. So now what I'm saying is, right now, I'm kind of getting like that's going to be like a black hole in the conversations I'm going to be having with Nijai males. I'm like, but it's not a big black hole in the data. I mean, it is simply a fact. There's a lot of Nijai male comedians, so at some point broaching that subject in a positive way, you mean will need to become up. I definitely get the vibe that I won't want to broach the subject quickly. But as Glenn was kind of noting, like, there are certain things, like if I talk to Nijai male about being a spirit force creature, I want to be able to talk about it in a way that actually makes sense to the data. Do you mean, for example, like take Bugs Bunny? I think that's a great example. I think the manga one's also a great example. But at some point, I'm talking to some Nijai dude, we're becoming buddies, we're going to talk about naturally that phenomenal need power to just be so creative and so fast. I'll need some example of them doing this.
Yeah.
Right now, I can't think of a better example than to show you interviews of Nijai dudes, and they just improv during the interview, and it's Nijai doing Nijai stuff. So I think there's a big red flag that they do a lot of media in self-deprecating roles. It's an issue, but they also are performing like brainstorming and wordplay and like real fast stuff like that. And I don't know who else can show that. Bugs Bunny can show it to a degree, but it is pre-done, it's scripted, and it's a cartoon. It's not a real face doing it.
I think like if they're interested in that in particular, that would be a good way to go. But it's like it may not necessarily be the first thing that you would go with. So
what I guess I'm saying is that
I mean it could be, but I mean.
Yeah, going to Spirit Force creature, I like what Bruno was saying here. Is it seems like going with cartoons may be the superior way to kind of replace the mythological metaphors we're going for. Use more cartoon anime. That could be much greater. It seems wrong to me somehow I'm not going to say to Nijai dudes like you're really big in comedy and there's like a ton of you. I mean,
I was just sort of going to one extreme to sort of highlight this difference, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's all one thing. It's all part of one thing.
And definitely, obviously, some of these are a lot more awkward than others. And I want to wait later in our.
And to be fair, I'm sure there are Nijai dudes that wouldn't necessarily, like to be compared to Bugs Bunny. So it's like, you kind of have to figure out, what might be best for the situation.
I think like if you approach it from the perspective of like, there's many different ways in which Nijai can show up in pop culture in general. That's one thing by itself. But Nijai, when it comes to comedy, when it comes to humor, when it comes to like finding all kinds of like making connections and stuff, it has to be noted that there is a large majority of them in comedy, and they do that sort of thing. And perhaps the state of comedy is not necessarily the best right now, and so Nijai are having to sort of adjust in this kind of impinged on way. They're having to deal with some windage in that respect. But there is something about comedy which is like very, very powerful, and something that Ni Alpha, but especially like the Nez powers, they have like a very strong connection to that area.
Definitely, I kind of combine what you guys are saying there. Is I will probably start with just some general complimentary thing, very quick, and just mention like Nijai males are really strong in this, like just like a quick list of all the things.
You're not like kind of over-investing in one thing.
Exactly.
You're leaving it kind of open.
And Nijai males, they're in a bunch of different fields, so I'll just mention like
And as you figure out, what are they, most interested in, what kinds of things you like, you can kind of, your conversations can head more down those avenues.
So I'll kind of like let them kind of pick which of those bubbles are more appealing, and then going off the
Coach, you actually did that with me when I was Red, because you saw that I had a bit more of an academic bent, and in your response, you really honed in on that particular focus. You read me, you read not just that I'm a Nijai, but you read what type of Nijai I am, and you really focused on that. But of course, that's an in-the-moment thing, and takes a lot of versatility.
And this is why it's really good to have you guys here, because basically we're talking about how do you bring them in degrees of comfortability while also being truthful. Each layer is truthful, but it's the more digestible part of their truth, and then going inward from there. But then where I'm still kind of this has been ongoing dialogue, and you guys being the Nijai who are here now, it's really important. Kind of what was able to get you here is getting more comfortable with your spirit force creature.
Coach, do you need a response now? I mean, do you need like a final answer now, or is this an ongoing process?
It's an ongoing thing. No, this is definitely an ongoing thing.
Yeah. I don't think the answer is necessarily going to be found now. I think we just have to keep on searching for it.
But we definitely have to track on two different cases here, which is the case of you're approaching Nijai male, you're just meeting them on the street, you're becoming new friends with them. Which topics do you talk about in which order? And when you're talking about a topical bubble, like say comedy, obviously you don't talk about all the Nijai male comedians. You focus on the ones that are like the coolest, the strongest, the most leading, and you avoid awkwardness. But then the other thing is, okay, now from the comfortable points, from the Bugs Bunny points, from the leading male actors, from the leading male music artists, from the leading male movie directors. Okay, so you've done that. Now walking out into two kind of awkward things. One, not being leading man as much as you'd like to in the demographics. That's a thing, so we have to kind of talk about that. And then the fact that it's a bit awkward sometimes as a male to embrace the Ni, openness and the Jai vulnerability.
Right. Because a lot of those qualities, a lot of the adaptive, powers and the adaptive, it tends to be very heavily associated with femininity, which is actually incorrect. Femininity is it's its own thing. It has to do with hormonal kind of like biological, sexual kind of stuff like that.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually being adaptive, when it comes to using the power, when it comes to especially the yin adaptive powers, the powers of Jai and Ni, those being associated with a male can sometimes be seen in this kind of like negative light, which can make
Right.
them. I think the word you used one time, Coach, was like I don't know, like a fairy. You know, like the fairy is not a bad thing though. Fairy, there's a lot of.
I
like,
never
really
thought of it as a
cool-
bad thing, but
Neither did I. Neither did I.
would.
I never thought of. Yeah, but there's like a negative association that it can have on the
There.
males, but it's not supposed to have that negative association. That needs to be addressed at some point.
Yeah,
And that's
so
really
I'm curious, Bruno, what you think of this is, like film directors have a lot of like leading kind of qualities to them. They're like they run their whole world. All the people work for them and make their vision so forth happen. So it's a very cool.
Yeah, like the quote. What is it? Like the actors are all the all the hoes, and the director is the pimp.
But
That's a derogatory
like that.
kind of way. But yeah, it's kind of the same.
it is. I'm curious to think of this as a tactic possibly is getting on board with a very respected director, and there's a lot of them, and so that's kind of like Vi. Starting with, because it was important to you, you've mentioned a couple times tonight, name recognition. So it'll be immediate name recognition and respect. And honestly, I'm always going to do this, but it may be useful with Nijai males to actually walk them backwards to their source power instead of forward. And so start with the Vi of, it's impressive, it's known, everyone acknowledges they're impressive. And then Z, their methodology, things they do that make them like that. And then, but that comes from their heart. It's a personal pride. And start, because all
That's
this,
a great idea, Coach.
you hear them talking about it. First, they're famous because they're badass. But then when you start talking, they usually have some kind of very interesting Z. The way they film, the way they write their scripts, they tend to have an interesting method. So talk about that, and then they always do projects that mean something to them. You hear them interview, it's a big part of that. And then creativity. The other people who are like on set, when they are like in awe of like all these Nijai directors, generally they're not talking about them just being badasses. It's creativity. The ability to just generate artistic new content day after day, minute after minute. If anyone can't think of it, they can. And like really pumping it up. But I think maybe as the fourth thing, as like the engine that makes this Nijai director so badass, I think it might be seen as this engine. You know what I mean? Where maybe
I like that a lot.
I think if you
Actually,
start with the engine, it might confuse them, ironically. So I think you might start with the outward and then build back to like where all the power comes from. And by that time, hopefully, they'll be already so impressed that the way that this creature is that impresses you, you'll be more ready, or not you, but a person be more ready to hear how they really work, since you've already kind of gotten them like wowed them.
Yeah, and the name recognition is important, but just as, or if not more important, is the identification. Like Charlie Kaufman, if he had been on that list from years ago in the beginning, I just think he hadn't been read. I don't think he was ever read as an IG. I think he was just not on the list at all. But if he had been on that list, and maybe Mel Blanc may have already been as an Nijai. I'm not sure though. I think he may have been an IG at that point. Yeah, Mel Blanc and Charlie Kaufman. Just the identification thing, like the name recognition is good, and for a lot of Nijai, for a lot of like,
I think name recognition as in it would be a given if they would know the name and it would actually carry like
that's going to be important for like to give it weight, to give it that punch that Nijai will want to have, but to really reel them in at first, the identification thing I think for me is strongest, and that doesn't necessarily go as much with the Z ranking or the Vi establishment of it. It's more of the Jai identification, the Jai connection. Like Charlie Kaufman's movies, they're extreme. They're so scattered. Like there's just so much like even just thinking about the concept, it's just like there's just so much Jai that just swells up, and it's just like, just like it just feels like raw Jai, like it feels like a raw beating heart to me, and
But see, now we're getting to whether or not it would be comfortable to address that straight out, and so this brings it to
not necessarily, but just throwing the name out there, Charlie Kaufman.
not as a problem. I think it'd be problematic. I was actually saying as a new level of sophistication.
Yeah. And the thing is, his work is so surreal. It's like it's very Jai heavy, but it's couched in this incredible niche surrealism.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
And it gives
I'm actually kind of a fan of a lot of his films.
So now we're talking about two different things here, which are very much related. So one is in a basic that I think for the males, it may be better to start with the outer, more directive powers and build back. That's a general sequence. But then each of the sequences is not just its own like one thing. It's a layer. It's a series of waves. So
it doesn't necessarily have to start with the directives. Is I guess maybe what I'm saying. I'm thinking maybe it could start with the Jai identification as well. Just anything but knee, basically. Anything but knee, I think.
Why, that's the question. Why does it have to be anything but knee? Knee seems like it's.
I'm
really
even
cool
wondering
power.
that myself.
Because
abstraction, like.
But also,
creativity.
what you're talking about, Bruno, is still not straight on Jai. It's not talking about Jai in its most authentic and mathematically clear terms. It's still being given surface layers. For example, surrealism. That's actually a level of knee. I mean, it exists as knee, but it's not talking about knee as knee. Going off the subjects, let's say I'm talking Nijai male, and I mentioned certain directors. This goes to the vibe. I'm going to mention ones that are pretty much given that you use these words yourself. Pretty much, you're not going to have a problem with it. So that's kind of thinking the vibe. So the first ones were like, these are like givens. They're just solid. They're just badass. Anyone would want to kind of know that they were like them. But then going into like the Jai, but also as far as the layers, when first touching the Jai, I'm kind of going with what you're saying. I would talk about directors they like, then movies they like. And we're getting Jai. I'm finding about what they like, and they may talk of that. But again, it seems like the males anyway, saying it's his gooey center that makes him so badass. I may not want to touch that right away. I may start, like you're saying, like, which movies do you like? Why do you like it? And then you start moving into, like, this really moved me here. I really like that moment there. Or it's starting to, like, bring it up. And then I think you might, for male anyway, might have talked to Jai directly. But as far as, like, directly saying it, I think it might be better.
Yeah, I think in that sense you might want to let them take the lead on, like, ask them interesting questions, just be like, so what kind of movies do you like, or that kind of thing, and then see where they kind of lead you, and then you can then use those cues.
Yeah, because it does seem like in that regard that the Nijai males, I think there's more red flags, and I think just being males, they're going to be a bit more, I don't know, quote-unquote discriminating. So, because I kind of energy I'm feeling off you, bro, not in a bad way at all, but I'm kind of reading you. I think that you're the kind of Nijai male, for example, that I would approach a lot. So it's kind of good to know what energy I'll be feeling when I do that. And one, name recognition of like, that's impressive, that's solid, that's a big deal. And then your Z, it's individualistic coming from you being a Nijai, but there's certain kind of like cutoffs you have. And so I want to kind of navigate those cutoffs first and not trip anything up. Once I find out that Charlie Kaufman, Vi, you heard the person, you think they're impressive. When I start talking about certain movies, you maybe heard those movies and you say, I like this one, I don't like this one. Okay, now I go to Jai. Now that I know which ones you liked, I'll start actually getting more into that. But like tonight, like I'd be afraid if I would start going down a path that I might run the Z. The Z has not yet been deactivated in the male. They're still like, am I going to be respected or is this going to go well? And it's not bad, but I think the males also are going to be more upfront on criteria for approval, like what's going to count. And so I want to kind of navigate those before I start. I think a male might actually be a little thrown off by trying to get bonding on Charlie Kaufman before I've actually established that's one you know his name, and these are the movies you think are good for such reasons.
Exactly. No, I think you're right. And yeah, starting off, yeah, that makes total sense. Starting out with the Vi, you know, your Martin Scorsese, your Francis Ford Coppola, your Notorious B.I.G., and we see a gangster theme there, but that's inherently tied with Z and Vi. Intrinsically, I mean, there's no getting around that.
Yeah, but at least leading, just leading males. We'll go for leading males, and if there's a gangster crossover, so be it.
So I mean, and that's, you know, it's part of the overcompensation thing that goes with the over modulation.
But like I said, I'm cool with actually stacking data and front loading it. That's allowed. That's allowed. My G says that's not manipulation. That's actually just being charismatic and being a storyteller. As long as it's truthful, and at the end, it does step out to the complete truth. That's kind of one thing that I feel as far as like being like, I'm not just saying stuff to a person to make them happy. You know what I mean? But with that said, I do want to make them happy. I do want to say stuff's going to make them happy. While I don't, you know, just like emoji reading, I don't want that to lead me off from actually trying to like portray the data. But I do want to put in the best foot forward, for sure. This has really been great. That one thing there, starting with the buy first, move backwards, that's been strong in general, and I think I'm really going to figure out what would be the right things to say before I get to the next one. Because if I saw a person like you, Bruno, geeking out when I mentioned the directors, and then you knew some of them, and then we start talking a bit, and you say something with your Z of why Charlie Kaufman's like impressive, because he does this, he does that, whatever, like, okay, then I'll start kind of like saying, I'll agree with why Charlie Kaufman's cool without saying things not untrue, but that's going to make their Jai happier. But if I pushed on that at first, it might be seen as, I might get it wrong. I might actually try to bomb with their Jai, it's not the right thing, or it's too soon. Too soon, buddy.
Guess what, guys? I don't even know who Charlie Kaufman is.
Have you seen like Being John Malkovich?
I actually didn't realize that. And I love that movie. So now, I do.
Oh yeah,
it's just an example.
He either wrote them, like wrote the screenplay for them, or he directed them.
Both, right?
I know he's done like some of both.
Yeah, I know Being John Malkovich. Yeah.
I actually like the way that Johnny Depp and Tim Burton get along. I think that's like a really good Nigez kind of like pair up. He has like really interesting ideas.
I think Tim Burton's an IG.
Oh, is he a Nigel? I thought he was a Nigel.
I guess the point is that you have to kind of read the person who you're approaching to know exactly, like, if you were to, I don't know, there's so many different interests of the...
Yeah, you got to read the person, but it's also good to have some general guidelines. So this is really giving me a lot to work with here with the males. I'll definitely do a little different. I'll try to get some impressive markers on the board first, whereas with the females, I'll probably go more with just trying to find something dazzling, and then if they want something more... Because I notice the females seem a little more nervous of you getting serious with them. Where it seems like the guys are a little more wary of not being taken serious. So I have to shift the approach accordingly there. So very different. Both Nijai, but different approach.
Yeah, like CeeLo Green. CeeLo Green is one of those cool Nijai cats. And,
when I heard I know it's Barkley. Oh my goodness! I played the shit out of that song. I still have to listen to it every now and then.
I know what you mean. It's just like. Bing, 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 like it gets into it and stuff. And that's a lot of like the genius of Me that you can really see in the way that they craft their music. It's not just the directive powers. It's very much like where did that come from? That came from a very very sharp, fast mind of an Nijai.
I'm thinking Will I Am, another guy.
I'm seeing a lot of that also in like the hip hop is the Nijai males are very very strong in that. Just the whole creativity of the stage, the fashion, the wordplay, the stage presence, all of it. It's really it's badass. The other one also is I was thinking they show in the music is there's a lot of Nijai band leaders. Interesting enough, and you think band leader, I think that'd be more like a director thing, but most time when you hear band leader, it tends to be a Nijai. I'm wondering if that might have to do with the way Nijai males are so good at being directors. They can kind of manage lots of talents and keep them doing what they need to do. If you're a band leader, it's kind of like part of your, it's an expected part of your job.
Yeah, and producers too, like Phil Spector, like the creator of the Wall of Sound, producer of the Beach Boys.
Rick Rubin.
What's that?
Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin, all these producer guys, and I think a lot of it comes with the just the adaptiveness of the need. It's like whatever you throw at it, it's going to throw you back something greater. It's just going to open it up. Whatever you throw at it. Like one person that I've really been interested in for a while is Christopher Marlowe, who's 99.999% likely the author of the works of Shakespeare. And we can't read Shakespeare because he's dead and gone, long gone. But we do know this, one, the works of Christopher Marlowe dovetail into the works of Shakespeare. So if you put the works of Christopher Marlowe, who supposedly died at some point, in the works of Shakespeare, it looks like a continuation. It looks like young author with kind of shitty, a little bit too much ego, and then some crazy shit happens, like nervous breakdown, like he has to go into hiding, and then that author matures. That's just what professors say. Okay, so bottom line is all of their works for both of them are not original. They're all copied off of someone else. They'll take someone else's story, rewrite it, and then put it back out under a new title, which is just what people used to do.
Right.
But it's just like a very, very sharp yin way. It's like a very, very refined version of that, and it's extremely yin. I mean, that's like totally yin way to do it, because a more yang author, like for example Naiji, they would just get a simulator vision out of nothing, and maybe like condense multiple stories together. They might crush multiple stories into one very dense one, but that's not what Shakespeare did. He basically would just take one story and then just open up all the possibilities within that. Like it's almost like taking a poem and turning it into a movie. That's basically what he did. And I know we can't use that because it's not, we don't know that for sure, but you know, that kind of example.
What you're saying, I mean, there's definitely some good thought to that. I mean, that's sound reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, if eventually we can do some sort of DNA thing, which would be difficult too, especially considering Christopher Marlowe doesn't even get credit for the works, and we don't even know where he's buried technically. But if there could ever be like DNA or facial analysis or handwriting reconstruction, whatever, I would be really surprised if he's not a Nijai, just given those techniques. And what we can carry over from that is, you know, the Nijai adaptability and how that, like most Nijai, I think many Nijai will pride themselves in how well they get along with almost anyone.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can work with people, and that might make them a band leader even more than the Naiji may be more creative, like in a group. The Naiji may have the more ideas, the more original thoughts, but the Nijai is just, he's the one that he's gonna gel everything together.
The bridge builder. The bridge.
Yeah, he's gonna bridge. Yeah, exactly.
Powers are naturally more connective.
Yeah, and so that would be another thing that Nijai, that you can put out, you can offer to a Nijai male that he would gladly take and be like, yeah, I want to be like that. I am like that.
Maybe that's an archetype to focus on. The bridge builder.
Yeah.
The sympathizer.
Well, I was planning on doing that for sure on the social entrepreneur angle, because there's so many Nijai males and like that have created new businesses to make new communication and
Right.
bridge building that was never there before. I mean, I don't think anyone really can touch the Nijai male on that. Not the Nijai male. And the Nijai female don't really tend to do that as much. I guess they could if it was there, but it seems like the pressure the Nijai male feel
Yes.
to be like a leading character, it tends to come out a lot in entrepreneurial
It does.
endeavors. You see Nijai females as well, but not the numbers of Nijai males. Quite a lot for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a slight step down for the females versus the males. Yeah.
I'm sure another one like being associated with like, and that's also another good way to kind of bring the collaboration in, because there's quite a few Nijez collaborations, big names in some of the big social entrepreneurs companies. So a way to kind of like prop up the Nijai male, how badass they are, but also kind of show like we have a bond. You know what I mean? Like kind of like make that connection, which I think would be helpful as well.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think for right now, as far as the pure knee spirit force creature, it's looking like I'll probably for the male back that up eventually to the knee after doing the other ones first, and then kind of concentrate, even the way Bruno's were talking about, try to use that kind of tone of like this engine of genius. You know what I mean? And so I think that would be the way to kind of envision the spirit force creature. Kind of like, a Nijai producer genius in the studio. Like maybe the studio kind of portray like the studio is a spirit force. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because they're so strong there, that might be a good way to kind of like, but there's like a raw, creativity in an adaptive yin way that they do. Because Nijai, males. The Nijai male and Naiji male, they're both into DJing and producing some, but the Nijai tend to do more productions, more collaborations, and things like that. I think is a real strong suit for them.
That
so I think
doesn't surprise me at all.
kind of talking about how they're able to bring all those things together to make stuff, I think would seem really cool. But we'll be focusing on maybe I guess it seemed like for the Nijai, if not gangster, I'd say street, kind of like street application of the incredible, cleverness.
They're constantly weaving things. There's like weaving threads.
Right. Which is what fairies do as well. But I'm saying, I think actually going with the street application that it may actually be a better way to go across.
Yeah, but I think otherwise it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, just like to see.
I agree, Glenn.
Like if you can connect more quickly with someone with a Nijai male with their knee more readily than as compared to like someone else, then that's something that you should definitely not hold off on doing. You should definitely take advantage.
Yeah, my case fairy worked fine.
And there's also like layers to each one, so you could go right to the knee. Like what kind of Bruno was saying, I could if I found a person like Nijai film directors that was a good response for them. We could go right into like their cleverness, their like the way they actually make these incredible atmospheric environments, and so forth. But it wouldn't necessarily be talking about it in like more like Spirit Force creature terms yet. It'd be talking more about creative powers that they have seen already. Like, well, yeah, I've seen that artist make that movie. That movie was awesome. That came from their knee. Oh, kind of like associating that work of art that impressed you with that knee. Clever genius was able to produce that. And then over time, and this time, like say, Glenn, could be right then. If they immediately respond to that, cause that's kind of got two layers to it. It's got the knee creativity, but it's got like its performance qualities. And see if they naturally unpack those two, or if they naturally talk about the knee creativity, artistic thing, like they liked being told they're like an artistic genius. Or was it more that movie was badass? That movie, like, do they more associate with like that? And that might tell me which ones to focus more on, like more the accomplishments of Nijai males, or more like their inner workings. Yeah, because when you're talking to them, you're kind of saying both. You're kind of saying like how Nijai males perform and trying to really show the awesomeness of that, but then also why they perform like that. And they may be more flinchy about the why and just want to see what. Or they may find the what a little boring and be much more interested into the why. And so I agree. You kind of figure out the kind of niche you're dealing with. And it may change also from subject to subject. Certain subjects they may be more easier to talk to. And you can zoom right in, like maybe like the Charlie Kaufman, maybe they like that, boom, and you're like talking to the person's jai and their knee right away. Or maybe you bring it up and they start throwing out other directors, other movies, like, oh, this is sort of like just kind of like a brainstorming, and we're still kind of like constellating each other, and that can go either way too. We're kind of feeling each other out like that. So this is really good. Definitely have options, because if you go in wanting one thing, then you're kind of a little overcommitted. Particularly with Nijai. You know what I mean? They're kind of more spontaneous that way, so you want to be able to, if they want to spontaneously go in this direction, as long as that actually does not take you off your path of their principles, you want to go with that. At least I do. I'm going to be able to go with that and just kind of ride it where they want to go. But then at some point, if they ride in certain areas of the Nijai peak path or the data, also knowing how to explain some of the more tricky.
Yeah, and you know what? I think there's another thing that would be good is to kind of like, if they say something and they make a point that is actually valid, providing a complementary secondary point is also very good to do as well. Like if they say something like, oh, like I really like the way this comedian, like let's say they're really good at, they have no issue talking about comedians, was able to make that joke, then you can also add in, and you know what? There's also something else about the comedians when it comes to this kind of thing. There was something about like what he was saying and why he was saying it in that kind of a way, and they kind of like explain a little bit more from a different angle or from a different perspective.
And I think that and on that point, I think as a complement to that, it would be really important to start bringing in the idea of the Naiji other, which for many Nijai, but especially ones that don't come from inspirational backgrounds, is going to be super confusing, but also super interesting and I mean, super. Any adjective like super confusing, super interesting,
Challenging.
super irritating in some fashion.
Yeah.
Well, the
You can
music,
use-
like for the males, the music bubble is really good. Then because you have the Naiji female and the
Yeah.
male highly represented. So it's,
Yeah, exactly.
And,
And,
there are some real life examples you can use. Like I think Justin Timberlake and Jessica Biel is a Nijez
Yeah.
Herhan, and I really like that combination. Yeah, but yeah.
yeah, they're pretty good, but they that's another thing too. Is like I feel like at this point, Podlayer may be more attractive to people who are like sort of unsettled, and so they're sort of searching,
Right.
and that sort of goes with not having an inspirational background. And so that might be something that we want to emphasize at this point as well, like the sort of benefits that we offer in terms of like focusing oneself and things like that. And so going along with what Glenn was saying, offering counterpoints and offering spin-offs from things that people might say, it's like, one big topic with Ni Alpha is feeling scattered, feeling not seeing a long-term plan, not having long-term goals, and so for things like that, the Nai focus is going to be really important, and for many Nijai, there will already be a built-in, even if they're not from inspirational backgrounds, there will be a built-in sense through whether it's through movies or books or music in my case, like certain musicians like Roshi Murphy that I've mentioned like a lot. Yeah, I mean her voice just always sticks out in my mind as like thinking back years ago as just like what is his voice? It's just like it's so serious and it's just so like it sounds so important. Like it's so important. Like I have to keep listening to it. It's not like it doesn't make me happy. It doesn't make me. It's not making me like feel good or anything. It just sounds so like
Heavy.
Like heavy and crucial. Like what? Like it doesn't. It's like it's not time to like to just like play around. It's like it's time to. I have there's something here to be done.
Yeah.
And there's a hook that most Nijai will have, but it's just a matter of identifying because Roshi Murphy, she's not the most popular singer here in the U.S., so to pull her out of a hat would be kind of unusual. But there's many others that you could, that I could have looked at and said something similar, not quite as strongly. Linda Perry, she's more of a songwriter nowadays. Gosh, just so many of them. And yeah, like you were saying, Ben, is just there's so many in music. Music is a really good one because it bypasses all the visual stuff. It bypasses everything but the pure sound. And for many people, that'll especially Nijai, that'll just hit the Jai head on. And so that's I think something that we can identify. Like Infinity, I'm curious, like what female Naiji artists would you consider? Like what I said.
This Sunday, I'm gonna use that as a live read. But I love Paramore. It turns out that I've gotten into them through the list, and all of a sudden I love their music. Naiji female lead singer, and I actually am gonna want to have read some of the other people in the band. But anyways. So Paramore really stands out for me, actually, and then Alicia Keys sounds really good. Yeah.
It's hard to pronounce her name, but she's awesome. From Monsters and Men.
All right.
Oh, who's Nijaz with the Nijai guy?
Yeah, they're badass. Her voice is sick. I like the one.
She's a soft-spoken.
The Mountain Song? I think in the Mountain Song, I really like it a lot. He does some cool like Jai stuff with his voice in there. And you've seen him doing like live in studio kind of performances. It's really cool. Like they're like little slide looks to each other. I like a lot of those Scandinavian singers.
Bjork.
They sound a cool sound.
Bjork.
Yeah, sure. Hey, jump in if you want. Kind of wrapping up. Off a couple minutes.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Yeah, so we were kind of talking. The main thrust of it was
I heard Naiji lady badassery.
there's that Nijai mail as far as like approach them out and we do our thing. What are maybe the better things to start talking about, and then areas to kind of focus on. And so
Yeah, and Coach had this really great idea to like start out from Vi and work backwards from there.
Because there's a lot of cultural conditioning of expectations for the males. So
Yeah.
if you start with the knee,
Yeah.
its raw form, where Jai might be seen as too, vulnerable or off, whatever. But
Yeah.
if you take like film directors who have really strong knee and Jai often, but you know who they are.
Yeah.
And then like there's Z methods. Well, that's really strong, and they got a great game, so to speak, in that kind of way. And then going to the Jai of what powered that, the heart behind it, and then like the clever genius behind that.
Yeah. Similar to the writers as well, like George R. R. Martin's,
Sure.
so forth, of like the vibe of being able to construct like an accurate world. Or
Yeah, we were talking about that's true. We were referring to as far as like the Nishai male and female, how they kind of self-identify a bit differently. And so if you come on a bit too strong with females, sometimes with like the more street stuff, it might be it might be too serious for them. We're saying the guys, it seems like being taken serious is a big issue for them. It's on their mind. So making sure that was being done might alleviate things, and then they'd be more ready to get into the momentum powers. What that would kind of like made safe.
yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. But from that perspective, definitely.
So just a different idea. And then we're also talking a lot of different areas of the Nijai male where we'll want to focus on more. Although like there's the comedy and things of that nature, there's also problem areas you have to watch out for. So kind of picking the stronger areas for the data and then focusing on the more leading male samples.
What would you say? I mean, in the areas where they're
Social
strong.
entrepreneurship, music, and film directors.
And animation. The comedy thing, we sort of concluded that like in the comedy thing, it's a little bit like wobbly. Like there's just as much
It depends on the
tendency
comic.
for the it depends a lot on the comic, but for the Adron males, there's a lot of tendency to sort of make themselves the butt of the joke, and it's a little bit humiliating sometimes. But in animation, that whole thing turns around like a lot.
Yeah, I do notice it a lot in like cartoons and stuff. In Japanese animation, the stories tend to be more developed, I guess. Well, not more developed, but they aren't necessarily like so necessarily. Like a lot of them will be like kind of like movie-like stories almost, like TV show-like stories.
Some ways the Japanese storytelling is a little behind.
There are some shows that are very comic, and some shows that are more like they can even be like Game of Thrones-like. So
Right.
It's
In general, the anime is kind of catching up as far as storytelling sophistication and nuance. But I think the one element is maybe what you're referring to. They seem to have a wider pantheon of heroes. Like as far as like Mojo's being represented, I think you see more adaptive males in general, and even also directed females in anime. And it's more okay.
There's actually a lot more carryover from like traditional folklore because Japan is just one culture that's been pretty insular this whole time. I mean, it has a lot of problems because of that. But one upside is that like the tradition and the culture are sort of like still part of the whole thing, and it's just like a uniform thing, so that everybody sort of understands like the mythical, the fairy type creatures. They're sort of built into it, and there's not a
I find it fascinating. That's something Jean-Lee and I have talked about. Is in anime, for example, I almost think it's more of a not saying it is, but it seems to me possibly to be more related to like the trends you see in sci-fi and fantasy in all cultures, because Japanese culture is fairly traditional and often is considered one of the more misogynistic countries in many ways. But the anime is not.
Yeah.
It's got like all these
Right.
characters, and also like a lot of the guys are very playful heroes. Where like Japanese male, like real culture, hard worker, leader of the ship, captain of your home kind of deal is really emphasized. So it's interesting in their anime, some other side comes out.
Yeah.
We see sci-fi too, and sci-fi has a lot more with like playful male characters and like directive female characters, and like, well, it's in outer space, so it's okay. I want to know what it does. It doesn't bother people if it's anime. You know what I mean?
Like, I've seen a lot of your classic like Neji male protagonists in anime, but I've also seen a lot of good, like a lot more Nijai males as well, and females that seem more like Neji in anime than I have seen in like Western movies and TV shows.
Yeah, it probably works out very nice.
It seems to me that it's a lot more balanced.
It does. It does.
In anime than it is
How is what do you call it anime like behind? You said, Coach, because that was kind of like an interesting point you made there. I was just curious.
Well, it's definitely been growing, but I've been into anime for some time, and one of the things that me and my friends who like anime implemented is, why won't they just do Game of Thrones with anime art? You know what I mean? But they tend to pick some stories where, here's some general things. They don't tend to have plot arcing as smooth as a lot of other storytelling traditions, and the payoff a lot of times is considered flat. The characters also are histrionic. Their expressions, even for cartoons, are a bit like exaggerated to the point of being.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
So cartoon.
And this you can be a cartoon and still be very sort of keep you in a certain mood. There's a bit of a jarringness in the mood, the tonal mood in a lot of anime, but that's changing. It's getting better. But I think it might be a crossover from the Japanese culture itself, when a lot of their art forms are a combination of either two, I'll say two, I don't want to grade the culture this way, but very subtle. And then when it goes to being overt, it's like broad. So subtle, broad, and it can be a bit jarring in that back and forth. And so
yeah, it's typical of Asian cultures. Like even the language, the voices that they speak, it's exactly as you described. It's like either quiet or like full on. But even not just Asian animation, but animation in general. Like we were talking about Bugs Bunny with Mel Blanc, and like a ton of other Nijai males. Ralph Bakshi's another one. He did Wizards, Lord of the Rings, and then American Pop.
Storyline though,
it's a bit different, and so here,
and the emotions don't really go a lot of times with even the story that they're portraying. Like that doesn't have a start, middle, like beginning, middle, end to the story. It's kind of disjointed, and then the emotions of the characters don't really go with even what they're.
As much, but they're getting better.
Yeah.
They're getting better.
Yeah.
So it lacks the kind of sophistication and nuance, you would say?
In some ways, it does. The other thing is that going with what Bruno was saying, like, say, Bugs Bunny, is actually, by most people's standards, and not just in America, around the world, he's considered a rather sophisticated character. And if you break it down, there's actually an element that he has that is generally why he's considered sophisticated. And you don't see this in hardly any anime. He's funny. Like the kind of funny of a person at the bar. The back and forth jokes, it actually sounds like a person who's used to being on stage and telling stand-up comedy. It sounds simple, but it's not. There are not a lot of Japanese stand-up comedy people. There's not as much tradition in that. So that level of sophistication carried over to the cartoons. So the jokes, for example, in most anime, for people are used to hearing, like, say, anything like, The League. If you're watching much of the Zez comedies, generally anime is not going to be able to hold you that way. The wit that they're going back and forth is.
Well, there's a crucial point. Yeah, there's a crucial thing about Japanese culture, which is that, and this is also recent in the West as well. It has to do with the developing, like the working hours and the Industrial Revolution, all these things. But in Japan, and this is how the West used to be as well, is there's no distinction between childhood and adulthood, meaning there's no teenage years.
Right.
You're sort of a kid until about 18, and then boom, you're an adult. You have responsibilities and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that plays a lot into like the whole mentality of it, and that's why you see a lot more like infantile or childish type behavior in like in characters that are portrayed as being like 16, 17, 18. 20 plus.
Interesting.
And it does make it for that kind of odd dynamic that's jarring to our ears.
Right. there's also two other elements. That historic element you said is very much there. There's, I think, two other large ones, which is content and delivery. In general, and this carries over, is that the Japanese style, actually Asian style in general, most countries is more formal. And so part of that is that it formalizes storytelling. And generally speaking, if you study storytelling around the world, the more formalized it gets, the less easy it is for audiences to get into it if they're not from there. The more naturalistic a performance is, hence why African drums have traveled around everywhere. Every music in the world has been affected by African drums. It's the most naturalistic. More formalized music doesn't tend to cross borders as much. It's less universal. There's more of a layer a hindering kind of veil. So, for example, this is also another thing, which is like certain content. So there's a formality. There's also certain content you don't do. So I'll kind of go with the blues tradition in the U.S. There's a thing that goes along with that. It's bigger than music. It actually goes into humor and storytelling. You talk about gritty stuff. You make fun of real sex, it's more real that way, and so that's how even the cartoons have. If you even look at the way Bugs Bunny does Intoxication, and this is like 50 years ago for a kid, it's rather spot on. I mean, accounting for being a cartoon, it's rather spot on. Where this anime, you'll see that they'll have heads being cut off all over the place, hentai, tentacle, sex action, every orifice, yet it still doesn't seem quite real. Do you mean like that they're actually used to talking about sex or bringing it up as a topic in a movie?
Well, the tentacle thing is a good example because it's a reflection of the insularity of the culture. For thousands of years, Japan sort of thrived in its position in the Pacific by cutting off other cultures, and they would selectively let in a few, like the Dutch, to do trading, but they basically kept even that, like, to a section off to a small corner of the culture.
Port areas.
And it required that kind of formality, and the whole, like, all of the expressions that you have, they're just like, they're metaphors and things like that are very specific and formalized. That's why it's not so universal, because it really wasn't meant for a worldwide audience up until 50 years ago. Up until 50 years ago, it was made in Japan for Japanese people, and it wasn't really supposed to go outside. And that's that's interesting for many reasons, but it's also it highlights a lot of problems with the culture.
I think actually it's come a long way since anime has become such a popular worldwide phenomenon. It's now gotten these other influences as people from other countries love anime, and then want to kind of contribute back some other storytelling aspects they didn't.
That also, and it's interesting too. It also goes along with, like, there's a lot of, like, political stuff with it too, because whenever a country wins over another country, it sort of has an impetus to maintain that communication going. Otherwise, it risks going to falling into the same kind of patterns, and starting another war or conflict again. So because of that, the U.S. made a big point of establishing, like, media connections with Germany, Japan, and all these other countries that they fought in the wars, and that actually helped. Like, the German film industry and the Japanese film industry owe a lot to the U.S. because of the war. They consciously decided to have an influence in these countries, so that propaganda and things like that wouldn't be disseminated like they were. That was a big reason for the war, was just the media control. Like, Hitler and the Japanese emperor, like, all of these people controlled the media. And because of that, they moved the people like puppets. Like, German cinema is super, super interesting, and it's like the basis for most of our modern cinema, like Fritz Lang and and so yeah, we can have a whole other discussion about that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's interesting too, because it seems like there's a lot of Nijai themes like we don't have much data, but the Japanese like anime writers and
the anime, the Nijai males, for the anime for anime film, the ones we know of,
they seem to be, and that may have to do with this the fact that the film industry was sort of transplanted into Japan, and so there didn't need to be a Naiji pioneer, as there usually is, like Thomas Edison. Well, not Thomas Edison, but like the people who pioneered film, and then Edison copied them and bullied them. But those kinds of people who are often Naiji, there didn't need to be that because there was an artificial transplant from the U.S. into the Japanese culture of the film technology, film cameras, studios, all these kinds of things that just didn't exist in Japan and wouldn't have existed if not for the U.S. Bringing that. And so that may have opened it up for Nijai because it's just like, oh, it's magically here, let's find out something to do with it. Whereas if a Naiji had burrowed that path, then they would be the ones at the helm.
Right.
More easily.
Although the Nijai also show up, I think, as much as Naiji at the beginning of things.
They're strong world builders.
They're strong world builders. They just do it
as well.
differently, more gathering things together that you won't necessarily have to like puncture through to get.
I feel like the kind of storytelling the anime, I feel like anime can kind of have sort of an irreverent feel to things a lot more often than other just like a Western TV show, for example. Certain scenes and reactions of the characters can sometimes feel like they're just more irreverent to the situation, and that might be easier for Nijai to. It might be more something Nijai are better at writing, I guess.
Although, I mean, if you think about it, George R. R. Martin, Mario Puzo movie, likely, and
Tolkien,
and then Martin Scorsese. So I mean, all these when it comes to film writers, directors, and book writers, I mean, they're very strong. Nijai males are very strong.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to explain, why we've really only seen Nijai so far when it comes to anime. I'm not saying there's any less it's any less down their alley to be doing other stuff, but it seems like Nijai would be really good at it. I don't know.
But it also seems like even in the West with said Roger Rabbit and Bugs Bunny and a lot of those like that is that the animation is a spirit force that seems to call out to the Nijai because it's not just the Japanese anime that we see and again, interesting here is
we have there's other forms of animation all over.
Yeah,
like cartoons and stuff.
Yeah, and it is interesting that you don't see Nijai females as much.
It's become more male thing.
But
not saying it's that way based on powers, but as far as routes available, it seems like for where the Nijai males want to be doing, that seems to be a route they choose.
I wonder if it has to do with part of it has to do with conditioning at all, or things that.
Well, it's a spirit force.
Ladies get more shine on versus.
I think I have what do you call it, sisters that are Nijai, and they actually are really into anime too. I was surprised when one of my sisters told I found out that she actually had bought Dragon Ball Z manga books or something. I was like, that seems like it's totally unlike what they would.
I know Nijai females, and they are into anime for sure.
They are into it, but as far as wanting to create it,
I think it's also there's the question of creating versus also taking lead.
And another thing, we need to kind of differentiate being a director of a film or a book author versus a manga artist. If you're the artist of the anime, that might be slightly different than other forms of production you might be involved in to create it.
Right, but what I've seen though is that the lead anime person in most of those projects is kind of sort of like the director also.
Vision.
Yeah. I mean, they take care of the story, and then then they're obviously gonna have control over what the animation is generally going to end up looking like.
I think probably has to be a leading man thing, because another area you see this too, which I've been talking about that is in music, is that both the Nijai male and female are strongly represented in music, but the male is represented more. And I think probably it's not necessarily the females can't do those kinds of feats because they clearly do it and are really well known when they do it, but I think there's, like Bruno was saying, there's more options for leading ladies in film. So some of that energy gets bled off into those roles, where for the Nijai male, there's not a lot of leading roles in acting, so more energy is going to go over to maybe directing films.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean,
also,
more availability.
The culture may not accept female directors as much.
I was wondering, like, also, like, because you even see, like, and this is just one anecdotal example that's recent, but like Jennifer Lawrence, Nijai, you know, she's been getting a lot of flack from people about now trying to write. You know, she's writing a movie with a screenplay with Amy Schumer and Amy Schumer's sister, but like getting a lot of flack for like how does she even think that she can do that kind of thing? You know, like she's just a girl. You know, like she's just a bubbly girl. Like she's, you know, she has no place. Like
but guys all the time they do acting, get well-known acting, and then they take their shot at directing. Ladies like what?
I think there's a little bit of that as well as like as far as like being seen to do it.
Yeah, there's like a child.
I think females in general, like when it comes to, because it's a major leadership role to be like a head, like in charge of like a full story like that, and like investing all that money and things like that. So there could just be cultural barriers of actually just yielding that to females.
You see, like females, they do stuff where they actually big companies, they bring people together, so they have those abilities. But they don't, for example, show up using those.
Like you don't see many female directors in general, so it's
exactly. Then directors and also like music producers. You see Nijai females, they'll do like big like social entrepreneur stuff, and they're like juggling that kind of activity, but it doesn't come out that way.
I mean, I'm not like you know, male versus female, like against female, like you know, I try to keep things balanced and fair, but you do see, like, I mean, from the time that boys and girls, like from the time they're little, like a boy is given more opportunities and encouraged to take leadership, to do things on their own, to a lot of times, you know, in many more, some cultures more accentuated than another, but in general, like you know, like if you fall, get up again, and like you can like scrap and get dirty and fight, and you know, like these things, and you're in boys.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of pushed to be like more hardened, I guess, like.
Generally, you take the lumps and go with it.
Yeah. Take lumps. You put in positions of leadership, and you know, try and you know, fail and get back up again, and that process is more encouraged and accepted. It seems like with boys versus girls from an early age.
And also, like as far as
definitely.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed is like with Jennifer Lawrence, it reminds me a little bit like Taylor Swift and her like writing music and talking about like relationships and stuff. People don't really like take her seriously because I think they think of like her, or they think of like Jennifer Lawrence in this sort of like childish kind of way, like which I think comes from the knee and comes from the Jai, like
although I think there's some overlapping factors there. In the case of Taylor Swift, I think probably the reason, because there's a lot of females that do what she's doing and don't get the response she's getting. I had to say the kind of thing most likely it is that she has Zai. And when Nijai do their emoting, which is why they're so great in comedy, for example, and also, you know, secret agent movies and whatnot, it can seem a bit not as full in as a values-based mojo. Most people, even you're talking about Vijay or Jivai, Jaini, Naiji, Nijai, it's mainly a values-based mojo, and so they kind of expect that. One thing I've heard said about Taylor Swift is that she seems a bit, with her emotions, like, too calculated when she's
That's interesting, yeah.
And
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, when she says she's been done wrong and everything, people don't really feel for her. That's what I hear a lot. Whereas, like, I mean, you take a
Vijay.
They're train wrecks, but people feel for them.
Yeah, they're like, they wear their heart on the sleeve, you know, and so people are like, oh, you know, they root for that, you know, kind of like.
Even is childish. Even is childish, and even doesn't make any sense. But they still, because they actually put their heart in their sleeve, you kind of like, I still give their emotions credit. I I think I've heard is like people have a hard time giving her emotions as much credit as other artists, or they don't say why. There's a pretty good reason as far as demographic goes. She is unusual in that regard. But I just see what you're saying, Glenn. But in Swift's case, I think there's something different there because they actually do like Vijay that act like girly girls but have big hearts. Even they throw tantrums. Like because actually I feel bad for Taylor Swift in that because Fiona Apple. I mean, she just writes the worst horrible breakup songs ever. I've been done wrong. Every relationship is bad because they do bad to me. It's never my fault. And people love her songs. They're like, those are great breakup songs. I'm like, why can't Taylor Swift do that? So, in that case, I think that's some logic-based bias, unfortunately.
But I think like the seriousness of it, you know what I mean? Like, there's something as far as like. They don't think that she's capable of like directing a movie or doing that kind of thing because it's sort of like I don't know, like there's something about her that seems like she's not like ready for that kind of thing. Like she's not like like who does she think she?
Like because in that kind of position, you're the leader of the vision and you're the leader of the production, and people look up to you. And I think typically people kind of expect a male, unless it's a really strong, lady who just has it all, is just like
like a Madonna or something like that.
Right, yeah, like a more of like a stronger presence, right? I think Jennifer Lawrence may seem like she will like have like a really good relationship with all of her people, but like when it comes to like can she take the reins on this kind of project like and be really serious and see it all the way through and be the kind of like leader that needs to be.
I think that's the reason they give, but I think it's mainly insecurity.
Of course.
Because like I think it would bother them if do that. It would make them feel like threatened, which is really kind of sad.
And there's another angle to that insecurity.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, please.
There's another angle to that insecurity, which is this. Any one of us could actually direct a major motion picture movie because it relies on a huge team of many people. Any one of us could do it, really, but they don't want to strip away that illusion and say, oh, this person that you hold up on a pedestal, actually, almost anyone could do that job.
I would say that anyone could do it. I would say
I'm exaggerating, but
I know what you mean. But in big studio films, there's a team that's kind of generally doing it. But I will say this: is you do have to have someone who is going to basically take responsibility for going bad or going good, and keep everything connected.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
I don't think gender plays into that ability.
Yeah, I think psychologically for people in that team, that might like make them.
I'm like more interested in like why certain mojos would show up more, like because like gender like usually if there's like a huge gap, I mean, it's because there's some mimetic disconnect there.
Directives, they have a lot of presence in directing and that kind of thing. But adaptives, they have a presence too. And
actually, Nijai Male is really big in directing.
Yeah, which is why it's interesting to see that
kind of
dimorphism.
Well, another one like that is actually on the music artist. Is that like I said, the Nijai Male are more pronounced in general, but two big differences is one, they tend to be band leaders a lot and producers. Kind of project makers. And the other difference is like street stuff. The Nijai female, they mainly hang out in the indie scene. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Some pop, but the females, I mean, in rap, for example, and most like mainstream pop tend to be Vijay or Jibai.
Right.
But for some reason, like I don't know, it's not accepted for them doing that. But the Nijai Male, there's quite a few of them doing this, the salty street stuff in the hip hop community. So it is.
What did you say there, Coach? Like, it's not. You're talking about the Vijay and like some mojo is not capable of doing that, or?
No, I'm saying I think it has to do with like a mojo feeling like, in this case, gender mojo feeling like there's an opportunity for them to do it, and then also whether or not the environment will give them that opportunity. So
which mojo?
In this case, the Nijai female. It seems to me that maybe a combination of they don't want to get involved with that because I think they may feel as a female more vulnerable because it's pretty misogynistic, hip hop world. And so I think the Nijai female feel a combination of vulnerable and not as okay with it. I think the Nijai feel maybe less vulnerable and are a little more, I'll say, okay with the. Well, I mean, as far as being like a pinup kind of person, they're a little more okay. The Nijai chafe under that kind of, even the female, they chafe a bit under that way of being seen.
Perceived, yeah.
But for example, like you see Nijai females like rolling in like rough stuff. So it's not they don't do that. A lot of Niji guys do rough stuff and they hang out with them. So it's not they don't mind doing that. But I don't know, maybe people don't want to see them doing it. Like kind of Jennifer Lawrence, if like all of a sudden, if I don't know, Sarah Bareilles was to bust out some street, you know what I mean, hip hop stuff. People like, no. Like, why not?
Like one of the few that I can think of is Maya, M-Y-A.
Right.
And if you look at her, if you watch interviews with her, she's like super modulated. Like she talks like this in like this very fake, like very like ultra calm voice, and it's like there's a little something off there, you know.
Yeah.
And
the Nijai dudes in the spoken word pretty bad too. All the ramen badass, but they're like, yo, it's like this, right. They're they're macking 24/7. It's like, dude, ease up on the macking.
Exactly.
You're over macking.
And it's funny too because it seems to carry over into country music a little bit. Like you see a lot of Nijai males in country, which is another way for them to get that like directive credit that Nijai males.
Like the kind of like being really engaging on stage is a way that the Nijai and other adaptive males are able to do the leading man that the public's more accepting of. Do you mean because like the way that Adroms do their leading maleness, generally in movies, either they're supporting or you see a lot of them. They're basically doing Nialpha. You see a lot of Nijai doing like law enforcement things, and they're basically doing like an IZ with heart. That's kind of like what they're doing. So I don't know, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The way it all plays out that way. I mean, I don't know where I was going with that.
It's like people are trying to fit, like they seek out opportunities where they'll fit, and also like.
That's what I was going to say.
Whether and then the industry and the audience or whoever the stakeholders are, whether they're accepting or not of that gender mojo.
Right. It seems like in music that they're able to be more naturally themselves. You see on Nijai, performing, they're like being more a natural Nijai, and the audience is going crazy for it. The ladies like yes. I mean, like it's, but it does seem like take Justin Timberlake for example. He's like a god on stage, but when they put him on movies, they almost always keep trying to make him kind of be like a Niji or something, and then it takes away his magic. Because I mean, why he's so awesome on stage is because he's being him. Do you know what I mean? But like, for some reason, like that archetype, whatever you call it, it doesn't exist as much in people's head for like a movie character. Like, why does it exist?
Not as a leading man.
Right.
I would say like that culture, like that women are like, oh, I swoon over that, and men is like, oh, I want to be like that. Even though that exists in real life, and
it's weird.
It's interesting. What gets idolized, I suppose, is different.
It also seems like when they portray what they're like off stage, they make it seem more directive. Do you like if you take a Nijai male, the way they are on stage, the way they're off stage is still going to be Nijai. But like in movies, I've noticed they generally portray like artists, generally either Niji-ish or like just overly sensitive in general. Mm-hmm. They don't really like. It's almost like they don't know how to translate the awe of like say them a Nijai stage performer to a movie landscape. Like they don't know what to do with it.
A lot of that maybe has to do with like the tradition of films, like even silent films. Like if you think back to silent films, obviously a Niji male is going to carry just a lot more gravitas and weight, and it's just they're not going to have to pretend to have that. Whereas a Niji male is, they're not going to. They're going to rely on things that it's not going to translate in the silent film as well. So
also if the tradition of musicals, if that still were a big thing, because like Hackman, for example, is really like he loves that, and I think that other Niji males would find a good niche within musicals, but it seems like the tradition, like musicals, for the exception of like Broadway. But like films, musical films are not as they were, you know.
Yeah, that I think they're mostly a theatrical thing. Like that, I think they were like I've seen. There's been a few really good musicals in film, but not too many.
I think also too is that like the Monomyth is heavily geared towards like a Naiji storyline. There actually needs to be more Monomyths than just that one. And the movies have kind of like taken like the work of Joseph Campbell and like if you want a movie to succeed, it has to follow the Monomyth.
Hero's Journey.
Hero's Journey, but it's a very generic. It's not generic Hero's Journey really.
Well, yeah, and now it's kind of a vicious circle because they don't want to. They want like kind of it's a very traditional industry in a way. Like they want their investment basically, the return on investment. So they're not gonna put their money into something that it's like doesn't follow the tried and true formula. I mean that's gonna be a
music.
itself.
That's where I think music actually music and comedy I think favor more just the pure creative powers because if your music sounds good or you're funny, you just are. And you don't need anyone else to get more, like you're saying, Bruno, like a movie, for example, there's a lot more need for other people to contribute. But you can just cut a song or cut a comedy track. If you got the goods, you got the goods. I say, for example, that's why the Nizai male and Nizai female show so much in comedy. You see the Nizai male and Nizai female, there's some too, but they have so many options for leading male and females in movies. They're like the most represented. The Nizai male and Nizai female, like the most represented gender mojos. So, but they don't really need that. But I think the other Nizes, they like the fact that although, not that they like the fact, but since they're not given those same opportunities, in comedy you can't stop them. And they actually, I think, are much more dominant than the other Nizes are, just because that's an outlet that they're actually allowed to really be given the credit that they're due. Now I like comedy and music in that way. I guess also writing. That's another one you see too. And again, a lot of, for example, like Naiji females and Nizai males like to do writing as well. Again, because if you write the story and it's good, then that's all there is to it. You don't have to have the world approve of that necessarily. I notice also too it's weird that there tends to be more cultural allowance in comedy, writing, and music. Something about movies. Maybe it's because it's more like you're reading TV too. It's more like you're seeing people interacting. The people's social issues kind of seems like it jumps up more. You know what I mean?
Oh, how so?
Well, gender stereotypes. They're more expected in movies and TV roles, and you see that in the casting. Not comedy. For example, like Nizai males and Nizai females are not the norm in general. They dominate in comedy. You know what I mean?
All those other forms are much older than movies. Movies are by far the newest one, and so it's sort of like a developing vocabulary.
It's also solo. It's they're older, but they're also can be done just you.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of differences in tradition and all these other things. Yeah, I think at some point we should definitely look at like the beginnings of movies. Like, I mean, I spent a while studying like early cinema, and early media, and that shit is just fascinating, and it plays so well into like the stuff that we're talking about now. We obviously don't have enough time.
Well, really talking about is actually storytelling, and
yeah, exactly. And
milestone the storytelling that humans did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just one more milestone. And going back further than that, it would
also a difference between the age and also the kind of project. Because at any age, you're going to have artists that are able to perform on the street corner by themselves. And they can do whatever they want. If they're good enough, that's it. Other things, even back in like ancient Greece or older, it's more of a production. If it's a production, you want special effects, you want the big cranes to come out on your Greek opera.
The chorus.
It buy-in. You need money. It takes millions of dollars for special effects. Millions of dollars come from big investors. Big investors tend to have more conservative values. So as you require a larger budget to do what you do, more social mores are just going to come in. That's just the way it works. But like music, the more mainstream you are, the more you have to watch what you say in your lyrics, lest you'll be dropped by sponsors. And if you're being held up by sponsorship money, you can't make the sponsors angry.
And in fact, you don't usually even write your own music. Like even Taylor Swift, who was known for writing a lot of her music, she actually, that was before I think Red, the previous album. Her most recent album is mostly collaborations with. There's a couple, like 3 or 4 Swedish and Scandinavian guys who make 90% plus of all music that you hear on Top 40
like
radio.
Her style changed dramatically from these last few albums. It seems like she's getting more, like more artificially spunky, and I wonder if that's playing into that.
Yeah, she's been collaborating with Dr. Luke and Max Martin and all these other guys who basically write pop music. Like if you listen to the Top 40 radio, you're listening to Dr. Luke and Max Martin, basically. Who are like 2 out of 4 Scandinavian dudes that. There's one lady, actually, 3 dudes and 1 lady that write 90% plus of Top 40 radio. So what you're actually listening to is those people.
That's what's in the arts. If you go at any time period, you're going to have those that are being given patronage, and if you do, you're going to have to deal with them leaning on your art. That's just the way it works. If you don't want them to lean on your art, you basically have to go your own way. And
you have to,
good luck.
You know, yeah, exactly.
Create your own empire.
Survive that way.
Yeah, so it's a combination because if you're good enough, then you can kind of write your own ticket. But even if you're good enough to get famous on your own, get powerful enough on your own, you even as an artist have to have this understanding. At some point, you're going to have to even tell your fans to fuck off because they'll start telling what your art is. That's just the way it works. If you want to get a million or billion clicks on your next Taylor Swift album, you're going to need those Scandinavian dudes to write it at that formula in this way with this video, and that's the way it's done. If you want to hit, you have to go that route. If you want to do art, it's another route. And of course, there's crossover. You have to decide which way you have to go. But generally, as much as you and your friends can gather resources on your own, which is why it's very important to Pod Layer that we can make very large groups of cooperative artists. That is the extent of your artistic autonomy. After that, you have to start paying. You have to pay for services. And when you start paying for it, it's a different relationship. They're not in it for the same reason, and they want a different kind of return on investment. So I guess it's kind of what is the return on investment? I guess for myself, and I think for all of us here, it's more about being able to do something with your life that was worthwhile, and you discovered yourself. You kind of like explored yourself. To me, nothing is Taylor Swift as a person is a choice she's making. But for me, I don't know that feels like I've done something different, because in the history of the world, there's always sort of like a patronage for how to successfully be an artist. And you can accept to do that or not accept to do that. Myself, I've always admired heroes, male, female, any kind of variety that do their own thing, because otherwise you're actually hearing the market. And like you're talking about there, Infiniti, the more like Taylor Swift's music recently, I almost feel like I hear the marketplace in her notes. Like tunes, I hear them notes. Like I feel like
very different from the early early songs. Very, very different. Like she crafted that in.
But it's 8 o'clock now, so we've gone half an hour over. But I wanted to give some time when Jilene was here.
That was fun.
So thank you all for a great session, and we kind of got a little just open it at the end. So I'm glad you got some time.
Yeah, that was fun. I think we basically covered like the main discussion topic, but then we just kind of started talking about various things. It's cool.
Yeah, lots of different things. Yeah.
So we never got to talk about the romantics of community building, or just how that's going to work. We can talk about that maybe another time as it comes up. But for next time, the plan will be for it to be interpretives. Everyone, so send an email out to everyone, including Demas, whether or not he's able to make it. I don't know, but we'll send it out. Do we want to do Monday or Tuesday next week?
Either day's fine.
Okay. How about everyone email Pod Layer Central what's good for Monday or Tuesday, and then we'll pick a day on that. Sound good?
Sure.
All right, Monday or Tuesday next week will be Interpreter's Temple. So everyone there, great discussion. We had some high-level, all-over-the-place stuff. That was fun.
That was a lot of fun.
Reform.